We're tax officers. We're counting taxable people. May we enter your home? Natural and smiling, Carrère, with a gesture of his hand, points them in the direction of the house. Poignon, taken by surprise, brings out his police badge. The suspect does not react. The house is small and narrow. Once they settle into the living room, Poignon in turn asks Carrère for his identification, and smiling, pulls out a gun. "Here are my papers," he shouts, and he shoots at the inspectors. In seconds, Carrère flipped from a calm man to a furious animal, struggling with an incredible energy.
Eugen Weidmann became the last person to be destroyed by capital punishment before a crowd of spectators in France, marking the end of a tradition of public punishment that had existed for 1,000 years. Eugen Weidmann, a handsome German expat, hatched a plan. Weidmann decided that his previous career of petty theft had little room for advancement. Besides, he wasn't very good at it, having already spent 5 years in a small German prison. So he recruited 2 compatriots, rented a villa near Paris, and began kidnapping rich tourists for the sole purpose of stealing their money. Weidmann proved about as good at kidnapping tourists as he was at petty theft. His first victim struggled, thwarting Weidmann's plans, so the German and his compatriots decided to start slaughtering their targets. After all, lifeless men can't struggle. After the 5th or 6th body, Weidmann was arrested. It was his slaying of the Brooklyn-born dancer Jean de Cauvin which particularly captured the media's attention and turned his trial into a tabloid favorite.
December 1937. The World's Fair closes. Some people benefit from this general chaos. The Cagoulard and the Popular Front clash. Everyone is on alert. 30 years old, very handsome, German. He's recently moved to Paris, and he wants to shine no matter what it takes. He'll be the last person to carry out the guillotine sentence in a public square.
Weidmann's final crime. Weidmann was born in Frankfurt am Main to the family of an export businessman and went to school there. He was sent to live with his grandparents at the outbreak of World War I. During this time, he started stealing. Later in his 20s, he served 5 years in jail for robbery. During his time in jail, Weidmann met 3 men who would later become his partners in crime: Roger Million, Blanc, and Fritz Frommer. After their release from jail, they decided to work together to kidnap rich tourists visiting France and steal their money. They rented a villa in St. Cloud near Paris for this purpose. Their first kidnap attempt ended in failure because their victims struggled too hard, forcing them to let go. Their second attempt at a New York dancer visiting France, Jean de Cauvin, was more successful. The relations between Jean de Cauvin, a professional dancer from Brooklyn, and Eugen Weidmann, a practiced criminal from Frankfurt am Main, were merely social. Sociability with strangers was her personal weakness and his professional stock in trade. Impressed by the tall, handsome German, de Cauvin wrote to a friend, "I have just met a charming German of keen intelligence who calls himself Siegfried. Perhaps I am going to another Wagnerian role. Who knows? I am going to visit him tomorrow at his villa in a beautiful place near a famous mansion that Napoleon gave Josephine." During their meeting, they smoked, and Siegfried gave her a glass of milk. De Cauvin took photos of Weidmann with her new camera, later found beside her body. The developed film showed her assassin. Weidmann then strangled and buried her in the villa's garden. She had 300 francs in cash and $430 in traveler's checks, which the group sent Million's mistress, Colette Tricot, to cash. The de Cauvin case started when her aunt received a telegram stating that all was well and not to worry. That evening a letter came mentioning Chicago gangster methods but assuring her that the girl was sound and safe, kidnapped, and held for ransom. The letter demanded $500 for the return of her niece. De Cauvin's brother Henry later came to France, offering a 10,000 franc reward from his father Abraham for information about the young woman. Arrest and trial. Officers from the region, led by a young inspector named Primborn, eventually tracked Weidmann to the villa from a business card left at Les Aubres' office. Arriving at his home, Weidmann found 2 officers waiting for him. Inviting them in, he then turned and fired 3 times at them with a pistol. Although they were unarmed, the wounded policemen managed to wrestle Weidmann down, knocking him unconscious with a hammer that happened to be nearby.
It's 2:30 p.m. on this Wednesday, December 8th, 1937. Head Inspector Émile Bourquin and Agent Ange Poignon keep watch over a house called La Voulzie. We're tax officers. We're counting taxable people. May we enter your home? Natural and smiling, Carrère, with a gesture of his hand, points them in the direction of the house. Poignon, taken by surprise, brings out his police badge. The suspect does not react. The house is small and narrow. Once they settle into the living room, Poignant in turn asks Carrère for his identification, and smiling, pulls out a gun. "Here are my papers," he shouts, and he shoots at the inspectors. In seconds, Carrère flipped from a calm man to a furious animal, struggling with an incredible energy.
Weidmann was a highly cooperative prisoner, confessing to all his slayings, including that of de Koven, the only one for which he expressed regret. He is reported to have said tearfully, "She was gentle and unsuspecting. When I reached for her throat, she went down like a doll." He quickly confessed to the slayings of 5 other people, including 3 women, a man, and a child. He was charged with 6 counts of slaying and brought to trial in November 1937. The trial was presided over by Judge Henri Donnedieu de Vabre and lasted for several days. Weidmann's defense attorneys attempted to argue that he was mentally unstable and not responsible for his actions. However, the prosecution presented a strong case, complete with eyewitness testimony and physical evidence linking Weidmann to the slayings. Weidmann himself was unrepentant and showed no remorse throughout the trial. He even attempted to profit from his notoriety, selling autographs and posing for photographs with journalists. This behavior only served to further inflame public opinion against him. On December 17, 1937, Weidmann was found guilty on all 6 counts of slaying and sentenced to his end by guillotine. Weidmann's trial was perfect for the spectacle of headlines and the flashbulbs of 20th century cameras. A handsome assassin, a smitten showgirl, and a brief relationship before her grisly slaying. Colette wrote salacious scenes for the Paris Soir, and Jean-Paul Sartre complained about the ceaseless coverage in his 1945 novel L'Âge de Raison. Perhaps ironically, Weidmann's conviction was aided by the photograph. When Koven's body had been discovered, it was surrounded by recently developed snapshots of her assassin. After his arrest, Weidmann's photograph was splashed across the front pages of nearly every newspaper. A Bertillon card and a snapshot of him immediately after arrest, his head bandaged from the struggle during his arrest. Once confirmed as a criminal, Weidmann became a photograph where the specter of his impending doom haunted the images. Weidmann's end. Weidmann was of course punished for his crimes with the capital punishment. The sentence was carried out in public on June 17, 1939, in front of the St. Pierre prison in Versailles. His punishment was originally scheduled for May 1939, but it was delayed due to a change in government and legal challenges by his defense team. Thousands of people had gathered to witness the punishment, including journalists, photographers, and curious onlookers. Weidmann's behavior leading up to his punishment was unusual, to say the least. He had become something of a media sensation, selling autographs and posing for photographs with journalists. He even tried to escape from prison twice, once by dressing up as a prison guard and once by digging a tunnel under his cell. The crowds that had watched his trial gathered for his passing. 4 hours in advance, reported the International Herald Tribune. 600 persons pressed towards the Place Louis Barthou. There were catcalls and jests with the mobile guard, and occasionally a wave of cheering and whistling. In 2 brightly lighted cafes, waiters joked and perspired, and piles of sausage sandwiches, prepared in advance, went steadily down. A little after 4 a.m., Weidmann emerged from his cell, eyes tightly shut, his face flushed and his cheeks sunken. His blue prison-issued shirt had already been cut away from his neck and shoulders. Weidmann was placed in the waiting guillotine, his shoulders startlingly white against the dark polished wood of the machine. As he was led to the guillotine, Weidmann reportedly shouted, "Gentlemen, I ask for your forgiveness. I am not guilty." However, his protests fell on deaf ears. 10 seconds later, he was gone. Weidmann would probably have been forgotten and effervesced like all tabloid criminals if not for the intervention of technology. Unbeknownst to Parisian prison officials, a film camera had been set up in one of the apartments overlooking the Place Louis Barthou. The film recorded Weidmann's passing, and by the next morning, photographic stills appeared on the cover of nearly every French newspaper. The aftermath of the incident. Why was this to become the last public capital punishment in France? In the days following Weidmann's end, the press expressed growing indignation at the way the crowd had behaved. A report in Paris Soir, published the day after the punishment but seemingly drafted in the heat of the moment, characterized the spectators as a disgusting and unruly crowd which was devouring sandwiches and jostling, clamoring, whistling. Before long, the government decreed the end of public capital punishments, expressing its regret that such spectacles, which were intended to have a moralizing effect, instead seemed to produce practically the opposite results. Weidmann went down in history as the last man in France to be guillotined for the entertainment of the awaiting crowd, a dubious distinction. The government did not find fault in the grisly punishment itself. Of course it couldn't have. That would have been an admission of justice's guilt. Rather, it blamed the so-called unruly behavior of the savage crowd. The spectacle of bloodlust was apparently too powerful for the film. Public guillotining was hidden behind the confines of the prison wall, privatized to conceal the spectacle from the very technology that it had worked in concert with. Although spectators had been expressing their enthusiasm for, and snacking in the middle of, these performances for a very long time, what made this punishment different was the fact that it had been delayed beyond the usual twilight hour of dawn, and there had been sufficient light for several startlingly clear photographs to be taken. Photographs soon appeared in magazines across the world, including Match and Life. Worse still, from the authorities' point of view, someone had managed to capture the entire event on film. The photograph, once a friendly companion to the guillotine, had turned on its old friend. In unsympathetic hands, the photograph cast doubts on the actions of the guillotine. Its public consumption questioned a system of justice that was supposed to appear natural. The public passing of Eugen Weidmann was a turning point in French history. The gruesome spectacle of a person being publicly punished by guillotine had long been a part of French culture. But the Weidmann case helped to turn public opinion against capital punishment. The French government officially abolished capital punishment in 1981, and today, France is a vocal opponent of capital punishment worldwide. The end of Eugen Weidmann also had a significant impact on the media. The sensational nature of his case and the public's fascination with him helped to create a template for how the media covers criminal trials and punishments. Today, the media plays an important role in shaping public opinion about crime and punishment, and the Weidmann case is still studied by journalists and scholars as an example of the power of the media to shape public perception. That's all for today's video. See you all next time.